Hello Traceable designers! Today we're going to talk about no-sew rod pockets, some possible mistakes, and easy ways to fix them. Let's start by learning a little bit about the rod pockets. The cornice style valances include rod pockets for the side panels. The center panels do Velcro over the side panels and connect to the back of the rod. Most of the Traceable designer styles include single panel options, which are continuous rod hanging pockets that will hang across the rod. The cornice style design forms all include a positioning line. This marker is used to position the fusible backing below the rod pocket section. The fusible backing is attached to the fabric, and then the lining is attached over the fusible backing. The lined fabric positioning marker indicates the top edge of the finished side panel. The fusible adhesive is always positioned below the lined fabric positioning marker and is used to hold the lining to the back of your fabric section. Make sure to observe the markers. You can see on the arch style there is a top line for the center panel and a different line for the side panel. So always use the lined fabric positioning marker when positioning your fusible backing. The straight cornice style design form is typically used to make the wide straight panels. These have a continuous rod pocket that go across the rod. It's also used to make side and center panels. So make sure when you're using the straight form that you observe the lined fabric positioning marker, leaving the upper section free of lining for your pocket. When making a single panel valance, you do have the option of making a smaller rod pocket. That simply means reducing the size. If you're not using a 3-inch wide pocket or a 2.5-inch wide pocket curtain rod, you can use a 1-inch and then just make a 2-inch pocket. You would use 4 inches of fabric for that. The smallest you should ever go is 1.5 inches so that your rod will split through. That would be a 3-inch cut for your top pocket. The lambrequin valance styles also are made the same way, with a rod hanging pocket for the side panels, and then they use connector panels and center panels with a rod pocket, or you can use the two side panels and connect them with one continuous long rod pocket. The difference with the lambrequin design form is there is not a separate section for the rod pocket. You do need to slide the design form up and then just trace the rod pocket section. The top of the lambrequin form is actually the top of the valance panel when it's finished, and you'll add the extra section above for your rod pocket. You can use a wide pocket rod or a smaller pocket if you'd like. So now let's talk about how a rod pocket should be created. You can see that the lining is below the rod pocket section, so you'll fuse the lining in place before you begin, always leaving your upper section free for your rod pocket. That does fold over, fusible backing is added, and then that is removed and then folded and fused again. This will leave an open pocket. Okay, so mistakes number 1 and 2. What happens if you seal your pocket shut or cut the pocket too small? Let's look at how that could happen. You could mistakenly put your fusible backing across the top of the lining, fuse that down, thinking that you're making your rod pocket. Then when you remove the paper for the glue and fold the first fold over, you've now completely sealed the pocket shut, and there's no way to make a rod hanging pocket without undoing it and starting over. So what will you do? You will warm up the fabric and then just peel it apart. So you've got glue on there, so run your iron across the section and that'll loosen the glue. Peel that back and open that pocket. Then you'll need to cut that section off. The upper section with the glue needs to be removed. So you'll do that first. So you just follow along the fold and just cut that top section off. So to start over, we need to add the fabric back to the top rod pocket section. I'm adding the fabric on top, but I'm also giving myself about another 1.5 inches. I'm using lining. You can actually use the valance fabric if you prefer. So I'm just cutting along the top edge of the lined section behind, giving myself an extra 1 or 2 inches on top. So to adjoin the two fabric sections, I cut a strip of fusible backing. You can also use seam tape, and then you just position that across the top edge of the fabric and fuse that in place. Once that's cool, just remove the paper to expose the glue, and then position your fabric or your piece of lining across the glue and then fuse that down to seal that. Then you're just going to cut the rod pocket so that it's straight on both sides, and then we're going to start over. We'll make a new rod pocket. So to make your pocket, just fold your fabric over to meet the top edge of the lining and then iron that down. Then you'll just add a piece of fusible backing that fits inside of the folded section, does not extend past the edges. Iron that down so that you deposit the glue. Then just peel off the paper and fold the rod pocket over across the back of the lining and fuse that down, and you will have created a brand new rod hanging pocket. Okay, moving on to mistake number 3. You forgot to add the rod pocket section, or you accidentally cut the rod pocket section off. So to fix this, we just need to add a rod hanging pocket section. So we're going to add 6 inches to the top. I'm actually going to add 7 inches or 7.5 inches of fabric to the top. So we're just going to fuse a piece of backing across the top back side of the lining. Once that's cooled, peel that off, and then just add another section of lining or fabric to the top of your valance. This fix is a little different because you do have to fold part of your valance fabric over, because you can't have the lining showing across the top or the cut section of the valance showing across the top. So you do need to fold down about 1/2 inch of your side panel or of your valance so that you will shorten it just a little bit, but it'll have a nice clean top edge. Then just run your iron across the top to flatten that. For this fix, you do need to fold your rod pocket section over to the fold, not to the top edge of where you fused, but over to where it folded to hide the lining section. So you'll fold that over, and then you'll make your rod pocket. But in this case, mine's kind of long. I'm making a smaller rod pocket, so I'm just taking off a little bit of excess, measuring across and cutting that off so that I have a little smaller rod pocket. So now just proceed with making your rod pocket folded over to meet the folded area that's below the lining that's attached, and then just add your fusible backing to that folded section. Make sure you don't overlap onto the ironing board. Iron that down, remove the paper to expose the glue, and then fold that pocket over top of the lining, and then fuse that in place, and you'll have a new completed rod hanging pocket. Even though this panel will be about 1 inch shorter, if you start with the lined fabric positioning marker, it's an extra long panel to begin with. Okay, final fix number 4. You added lining to the rod pocket section by mistake. To fix this, you need to identify your lined fabric positioning marker, the section that should not have had lining above, and you'll mark that off across the whole panel. So these marks will indicate the top of your rod. This will be the top edge of your valance. Now you can see this is pretty thick, so if you try to make a rod pocket, you'll have trouble getting that to seal, and it just might not work for you. So a better solution is to measure down far enough so that you've got plenty of room for your rod pocket, and then you want to add about 1 inch or 1.5 inches for your seam tape. So since I'm going to do a smaller rod, I'm going to use the 1 inch rod, I'm really only going to need about 3 inches of fabric. So I'm just going to remove the excess, measure across and remove the excess from across the top of my valance. And then I'm going to put a piece of seam tape across that, and then I can fuse that down and make my rod pocket. So measure down, give yourself plenty of room. It can't hurt to make it too wide. If you are using a wide pocket rod, make sure you go down pretty deep with your panel. You may not want to cut any excess off at all. But I'm measuring 3 inches, then I'm going to cut that top section off, and then I'll proceed with adding a strip of seam tape across the back of the lining. Of course, if you don't have seam tape, just cut about a 1 inch strip of fusible backing and just carry that right across the top edge of your lining, sealing that down. You can even use multiple strips if you have a really long panel. So then just do a double check to make sure everything's even, and then just fuse your rod pocket down, and you'll have a brand new rod hanging pocket for your valance. Thank you for joining me, Traceable Designers, and make sure to check in for more helpful tips from Traceable Designer.